Hello colleagues, I'm Colin Simpson from TELedvisors and welcome to our April webinar. Today we're going to be looking at some different facets of professional learning and professional development in higher education institutions. We'll have Professor Kylie Readman, who's the Pro Vice Chancellor of Education at Murdoch University, also representing CAULLT, which is the Council of Australasian University Leaders of Learning and Teaching, talking about a really interesting report that they put out last year, and we'll be following that up with a discussion with Dr. Keith Heggett, who is in the process of putting together a plan for training qualifications for learning designers. So let me just introduce Professor Readman. Professor Kylie Readman is the Pro Vice Chancellor of Education at Murdoch University and a past Vice President of CAULLT. She's passionate about teaching excellence, learner engagement and student success. She creates the institutional conditions for building staff and student capacity in learning and teaching in the higher education sector, focusing on engaging and innovative curriculum, embedded and holistic support, and future-focused initiatives that push professional practice to the forefront of higher education innovation. And I'll hand over to you, Kylie.
All of that from my spare bedroom, so that's amazing, isn't it? Hello colleagues, it's lovely to have so many of you here. There's about nearly 50 people online today. I just hope to give a brief overview of this project that we did as part of CAULLT last year. I've been involved in CAULLT in a number of executive roles with them and as a member for many years, including, if some of you would remember back to when it was called CADAD, was for Directors of Academic Development. And we broadened out the membership and the name, changed the name, really to acknowledge that there's leadership of learning and teaching that happens across the university, and every university is actually quite different in the way that they do that. And some of that is reflected in this report that we produced. And I think Colin has shared the full report with you. So this is really more, I think, a few minutes about how we went about it, and what we learned as a result, and what we think has happened in terms of strengthening our relationship, particularly with DVCA group, which is part of the Universities Australia kind of executive leaders group. So I'll just move my way through this. Feel free to interrupt. I've got the chat open, so if you have any questions, I'm happy to do that. I want to also acknowledge Kim Fraser, who some of you will know from Swinburne and some from RMIT, recently retired. She did a lot of the heavy lifting on this, analysing the data as it came through in 2 waves. So I'll just talk about how that happened now. So basically what happened, and this is to do with the change to, I guess, professional recognition, particularly in relation to advanced higher ed, which was also used to be called the HEA, Higher Education Academy. That's in the UK. I have to declare that I'm the chair of the Australasian Strategic Advisory Board for that group. Don't get paid by them or work for them or anything like that, but just to recognise that I chair the representative group that speaks with them about what we need in Australia, New Zealand and the sort of oceanic region more broadly. So Dom, okay, so can someone catch up with Dom who can't hear me? I'm not sure if that's a me problem or a him problem, or if there's something else going on. Okay, I'll try and just lean into my speaker and hopefully make that a bit clearer for you. So background to this, the DVCAs wanted to really understand, well, what's happening in professional development and professional recognition? And how do we know? And then they invited Sally Kift, former DVCA at James Cook, to talk with them about what to do. Sally obviously was aware of the existence of CADAD, and many DVCAs were and actually have come through to that position through a pathway of being a university leader in learning and teaching, which is fantastic. So we were asked to do an environmental scan find out for the DVCAs what's happened, what's happening in their universities and across the sector when it comes to professional development or professional learning and recognition. So see on this slide, we first did that over a kind of December-January period, not an ideal time to have a survey, but we did get 21 out of 35 of our members, CAULLT's membership responses. And then I took that back to the DVCA group, and then they said that they wanted to make sure that every single institution was included, and many of them were saying, we included, was it our university that, did we not respond? So I didn't want to really say anything about that. But anyway, we got an almost universal response to the second version of the survey. And I have to say, it was very similar in terms of what we learned in the first survey, but it was more comprehensive, I guess. We also included New Zealand universities in that because CAULLT is an Australasian organisation and we have members from New Zealand that were included. So I can sort of see from the names I can see down the side that that people are from a broad range of universities and from all over Australia and probably New Zealand as well. But I wanted to just think about, and happy for people to just briefly say, you know, are any of these things relevant to you? So I know that Keith's going to lead a discussion in a minute about what are the professional learning needs of learning designers. But I'm assuming that all of you, or almost all of you, have got roles that fit across some of these, that you engage staff in professional learning as part of your work. And I imagine over the last 12 weeks, you've been ramping right up and training people really in use of technologies like this one, Black Collaborate, and a whole range of other things so that they can quickly turn from face-to-face teaching to online teaching. And I'm sure in many cases, and depending on how progressed your university is in the technology enhanced learning framework, certainly for some parts of our university, it's been a minimum viable product. And actually the most important thing we've found is that it's the educators that are engaging with students and their attitude and can-do approach has really been the most significant thing to keep people learning. Yep. So I'm assuming that there's a whole range of activities that you're engaged in that are in that field. So I hope I've got that right because I framed the next few comments around that. I also wanted to just show what happened between semester, first environmental scan and the second one. So this was to September 2019. So we've moved on another 6 months. I would say, I can confidently say that the advanced HE affiliated universities is up more in the 27, 28, but most of the other high level stats are pretty stable. I'll go through some of those now to just sort of shape up the main themes that emerge from the environmental scan. So what we found was that, and this is in the report, so I won't dwell on it too much, that most universities have statements and policies, and it's written into agreements, probation and promotion around teaching quality or around professional learning and development. For some of your universities, it's a requirement at different stages, particularly probation and new join stage, but also for some of you, ongoing professional learning in learning and teaching, and then a broad brushstroke of other things as well. Almost all universities have professional learning units or central learning and teaching units or something of that nature, and they are either centralised or distributed across colleges, faculties, schools, whatever you have at your university. And those normally include all of you, all of the people who are in the TEL component as well. And I'm going to talk in a minute about a project that I think perhaps someone in this group was part of for CAULLT, which is about what is the work of learning designers. One of the things we found at Murdoch, again, that's worked really well, I mean, it's in that kind of never waste a crisis part. Our college staff and our central staff have just formed one kind of extended and distributed group and have worked extremely closely and very hard together to support people to engage in online learning. And I hope that's one of the things we maintain and continue as we move into a different kind of situation in the second half of this year. All but one of the 38 respondents said that there was some form of recognition and celebration around learning and teaching quality, and that went from, and people named things like being eligible for fellowships of various kinds, of having a sort of scholarship semester or teaching semester where people could focus on the quality of their learning and teaching, being engaged in SOTL presentations, attending an ASCALite conference or something similar to that. That we talked about the Distinguished Educators Scheme, which is at ANU, specialist teaching studies programs, etc. And also recognition through student surveys and other sort of more localised school awards and things like that. So there was a lot of that recognition and celebration. How that was distributed was always, there was lots of different ways that that happened. Many of the universities have articulated what teaching quality means, and there is a bit of a debate in the literature, as you'd be aware, about the difference between teaching quality and teacher quality, and there's some distinctions around that that I think are important when we're starting to talk about what does professional learning look like, because we can all continue learning, and some of our inherent qualities as people impact on the way that we teach, but can be equally engaging. So there's definitely not, and we know that's not a cookie cutter approach to what teaching quality looks like in the classroom or indeed in the online learning space. People talked in the teaching quality responses around things like, were there vision statements, were there explicit learning and teaching related policies, were there statements around what that looks like, did that feed back up into professional learning recognition and celebration and so on. The component was about program provision. So this is areas where you might teach graduate certificates in learning and teaching, professional learning programs that are accredited through Advanced HE, micro credentials, short and long time-based activities that people are either required to do or can choose to do, learning and teaching certificates and so on. 36 of the universities reported that they had that, and we identified over 100 learning and teaching related programs across the respondents. So that was a really big part of it, and I think that that's very important. The other part of that was interesting, and this is where Kim's work and other people's work comes in, is that people did share and work across universities. So it wasn't only we have this for our staff, but we have this grad cert, for example, or we have this micro credential and it's available for everybody and it can be shared. And I think that's an area that the DVCAs were particularly interested in, as opposed to, I guess, very expensive commercial conferences and things like that. They believe, and I think they're right, that the knowledge and the skill and the professionalism actually exists within the universities, and we need to be focused on the sharing and joint and shared learning as we go forward. Okay, I hope this is going okay. I want to acknowledge, and I'm wondering if Dom McGrath is the Dom I can see here, and Dom, you know, feel free to jump in. We funded a CAULLT project that Christine Slade, Dom McGrath and Ruth Greenaway did in 2017, but I think it's really relevant to this conversation. So I went back to it and had a look, and you would know better than me if this is what learning designers still do. I think even AIM learning design is a really interesting one, and I think that was one of the things that came out of the project, Dom, and if you want to speak, feel free to jump in, because this is your work that I'm presenting, that learning designers identified with all of these different aspects of the work, and I'm sure throughout the year or throughout the phase of learning that the university is going through, things are dialed up or down. Dom, do you want to, or can you? I don't know if the settings are so that you can speak. Okay, good. This was particularly a reach out to university learning designers. So, so that was really the context that it was set in. The second, there's another little part under that that's not showing, but I'll just speak to it really quickly, which is about what do learning designers do on a daily and weekly basis. And it was really things like show people how to use a learning management system, influence teachers and academics, apply learning theories, consult with academics about their teaching, design PD for academics, develop resources for students. It's actually quite a big and broad set of skills. And I think this is really useful work for what you're intending to do going forward. And Keith, I think this is really a good resource for you and to inform your future conversation. So I'm glad Dom's right in there doing it. And it was a kind of collaboration I think CAULLT should be doing more. So you're all here as AULLT, sort of part of the TELedvisor special interest group. CAULLT has partnered before with ACODE, but not with AULLT. But I had a look this morning at how many institutional members you have as well as individual members, and I think there's some opportunities there for you. And I think this was a really good project. It's available on the CAULLT website, but equally, I don't think that link is live anymore. I checked it, Dom, but you might want to share some of the snapshot work that you did. It's really helpful, and I think still really relevant. So going back and sort of by way of almost finishing up, we took these proposals for consideration to the DVCA's group and proposed that we should create an Australian teaching standards framework, and that should be articulated clearly. And I guess this is partly about, and this is a really important moment for universities as we're all scrambling to figure out what can we afford to do going forward, what memberships can we afford to have, what are the things that will make the best value for our staff, including our learning design and academic development staff. And how can we recognise when people move from university to university that they've done something that makes a lot of sense in any university. So we need to really think about that. So this is kind of where we were at in November last year, thinking about what we might do. And you may have heard, and I don't particularly feel strongly about this, but that the Advanced HE Professional Standards Framework is considered really a UK framework. They're now taking an approach of looking at how to realign that in a global context, and they have universities and higher education institutions from about 46, maybe more, different countries. So thinking about how to make those standards more globalised and certainly able to be contextualised. The reference in point 4 about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people is particularly the contextualisation for Australia. Within the DVCA group, there were last year, and it continues this year, Indigenous representatives. So Susan Page from UTS is the representative there. Her view was that, and I'll point to this in the next slide or in an upcoming slide, that rather than trying to build it in here in a way that might be tokenistic and not appropriate, that actually professional learning could contribute to ensuring that other statements around embedding Indigenous perspectives and knowledges be achieved in the professional learning context. I'll talk about that in a minute. So really, and there was also quite a conversation around wealthy universities versus not so wealthy universities and how we can make sure that every university could access this teaching standards framework. So what did the DVC group do? Again, this is the November last year, before we knew about coronavirus or knew that it was even a thing. They were really looking at how CAULLT could support them and engage in organisation to organisation collaborations. I guess at the DVCA level, you want to know that things are happening and make sure that that your group, your university is contributing effectively to that. But they didn't necessarily want to be involved. I'm just looking at the chat and say it's an interesting thing, Tom, about university teaching and AQF qualifications. If you think back a few years, I think it was ANU that were the first ones to actively say we're not going to run our grad cert anymore, our grad cert in learning and teaching. And there's some interesting cool projects around grad certs in learning and teaching and their history, and I think at the moment they do not feel there's not a lot of them left, and they're one of those things that when people are doing those overall scans of what are the qualifications that have got enrolments, etc., and are working well, they're the ones that sort of go in that we need to look at this more, because normally students are part-time, normally they take ages to complete, there's always a subsidised kind of component to them. So it's a really interesting space to be in. But I think there is some potential micro-credentialing and stacking back into that kind of an AQF qualification. So I think there's some movement. Yes, I'm not surprised to see that, Tom. And I remember at the time when ANU cancelled that, because it was a really well-regarded program, that the sector was quite sort of shocked. Yeah, and there are still a few grad certs in higher ed or learning and teaching still available. I did a review of the one at Central Queensland University, some just recently, and it's going great. So there's some that are sitting in education schools or faculty, some that sit centrally. It really depends on what the setup is. There definitely is interest around shared and agreed set of standards. So if that's the work, I mean, the TELAS standards and other things you've done at the national level is a really important piece of work. And I think connecting this with that will make a lot of sense. There was still I guess, a lack of ability for the DVCAs to say, well, how will this actually happen? And that's where that last point about if only we had the OLT would be able to help. And I guess that Advanced HE in some ways and for some universities has stepped into that gap and filled it. And there's a professional transportable, globally recognised fellowship scheme that has been able to get a lot of traction in Australia and New Zealand universities. Yeah. So there's a lot of chat. If you want to do a grad cert in higher ed, there's a few going and a few online, which is particularly pertinent now. But also, you know, Deakin and others offering micro-credentials around learning and teaching. So it'd be interesting to see how that stacks over time and how that contributes to probation and promotion requirements. And my personal view is that when you build it in and make it part of what's required and value learning and teaching within the frameworks that are about promotion and probation, it makes a lot of difference. So this is what I was talking about. This is the CAULLT DVCA group, possible partnerships. Thinking about what else we could do in relation to professional learning and professional development in a shared way. If there was going to be a joint statement of principles, that was sort of where they got to. Should they jointly, or should Universities Australia endorse a set of principles for professional development and recognition of educators, which is somewhat written into the TEXA higher education standards as well? Should there be some other things? The second point is one I was talking about before, Susan Page's recommendation about actually using what already exists. Thinking about how CAULLT could support DVCA work plan priorities. That's something I would encourage AULLT to think about, talk about with DVCAs, because now's probably a point at which you might want to say, here's how our organisation can help your university. And there's definitely a lot that AULLT does that the DVCAs would be interested in knowing about, and how to get that on their agenda, or at least through your director or through your whoever it is, your PVC or DVC, give them the awareness of what CAULLT is and does, and maybe how many members you have, or if you have an institutional membership. The value proposition is really important right now, and I'm sure you've talked a lot about, and I can see from your webinars a lot about what can you make of this moment in terms of ensuring that the good things that have happened over the last few months continue to happen. So I guess there's just some thoughts there from me, and this is sort of partly my handover to Keith about, well, what's the bigger discussion? How can we ensure that, how can you ensure that what you are doing actually is contributing to that bigger picture and is aligned to it and extends it, and that your expertise in this space is utilised in the best possible way. It might be this second last point about engaging in an environmental scan of TEL-related professional learning. You've probably done a lot of that in the establishment of the standards, and it might be good to go back, and I'm not sure. I participated in those TELAS, professional learning activities when they were being established, but I don't know, as you would, what the overall outcome is. And then I just thought at the end, and I'm no longer the Vice President of CAULLT. I had to give it up because I just got too much else to do and I felt like I wasn't contributing effectively. But Marina Harvey at UNSW is the new president, and it might be a good opportunity. I saw that you had some memorandums of understanding with other countries, organisations, but it might be interesting to figure out what are the points of intersection with CAULLT and how we could work together to make that an effective partnership. So that's really all I say. I hope it's been helpful for you. And I'm happy to be part of a discussion.
No, that's really been fantastic, and many thanks, Professor Readman. I was actually chatting to Chris Campbell, who's the current CAULLT president, this morning, because I saw on your slide the thing about the MOU, and yeah, look, it's definitely on the to-do list, and there's a lot of interest. As a small, special interest group of people a little bit lower down the totem pole, it's particularly good to just get the sense of, that there's a plan for the future and there's some vision going on. Do you have a couple of minutes for any questions if people haven't already covered that in the chat?
Very happy to stay on.
Or we may have covered it all. So if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask, now is a good time. Either turn your mic on or just post something in the chat. Could be that there's a lot to digest as well.
Yeah. I think Keith's comment there about the challenge with standards is who determines them and who polices them, or how do we share responsibility for them is the other component with that. And I hope that that's the conversation you now go on to have. So we've done this. It was really useful for us. It was useful for our members to take the report that we wrote back into their organisations and say, look, this is what's happening and this is where we're not doing something, but we could. Or here's an area where we're really outstanding compared to everybody else. And that was really helpful from a kind of just a benchmarking perspective around what the professional learning opportunities are, and where we're strong, and then how we could work across that, all of the other networks that we have. So IRU or Group of 8 or whatever regional universities network you're involved in, where there are those opportunities to work collaboratively and collectively, and be really smart about the way you use resources. Yep.
Fantastic.
So Sue, obviously there's universities that are in that sort of vet university dual sector. I don't think there would be a reason not to include that, but there wasn't consideration of that at the time because CAULLT is really focused on university leadership in learning and teaching. So we only went out to our university members in Australia and New Zealand. Yep.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think there's a lot that both sectors can learn from each other.
Yeah.
I might keep things moving. So if people could show their appreciation in the chat, little claps and happy faces and all of the other things. And yeah, thanks again for your time, Professor Readman.
No problem. I hope you have a really good discussion now, and I might stay on for a little while and just listen if that's okay.
Oh, please, absolutely.
Turn my mic and camera off so I can hand over to Keith.